I remember very clearly the first time I heard the word propaganda, and I looked it up in the dictionary, and I had to look it up like many times after that because the meaning of the word wouldn't stick in my head. I was 13 years old, and I had just joined my school newspaper as a student journalist. I was starting to become friends with the senior students in the newspaper, and I was a kid who read encyclopedias and I watched nature documentaries, but I had trouble understanding propaganda and remembering the meaning because I think I didn't have a lot of experience of what propaganda was, and I didn't have much to kind of like identify it and pin it on to help me remember. So I didn't have much context basically in the ways that propaganda is weaponized by various powerful actors. Looking back, of course, it's clear now that even the encyclopedias and nature documentaries were propagandized. David Attenborough was definitely part of that. This gentle white man promoting Western science, traveling the world, teaching us about animal species and natural ecosystems. Only in an ethnocidal colonial world order can this happen. So I now understand more about what propaganda is from that key moment in my life, on the newspaper, and starting to understand mechanisms of structural power within our colonial world order. When did you begin understanding and seeing how power works?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think socialization itself helped me understand a more basic understanding of power in the sense of like social relations, how people operate, what is behind their actions, interests, and how hierarchies get established. Um, but I think this more nuanced and the realization of power as this more intricate and sophisticated system of manipulation at larger scales came much later. I think it really became clear to me when I entered my master's program because it was the first thing I jumped after finishing undergrad and felt myself immersed in that very academic world with a lot of hierarchies that made little logical sense, but were largely accepted without question. And I witnessed very clearly how certain ideas were deemed more rigorous or legitimate, not based on their merit or relevance, but based on whether they could be anchored in Western concepts of science and knowledge production. So I think that's when I started seeing academia itself as a propaganda mechanism. You know, this requirement that knowledge is validated to Western epistemological frameworks as a systematic process of epistemicide, of erasing other ways of knowing and understanding the world. And as student and researcher, um, how we were being trained to kind of internalize these standards as natural, like obvious and objective. Um, and I think there's a sophistication there in how the system don't rely on obvious coercion, but on making people believe that they are thinking for themselves when actually, yes, you have choices, but these choices are very much narrowed down. Um, I think that was an experience that allowed me to see a little bit more about these mechanisms. And of course, as you said, propaganda and the way we receive messages all the time is also a way to spot these things, especially in my background inside graphic design and advertising. Like there's so much manipulation in how the information is presented. Like every choice there is a conscious one to call your attention to something, to highlight something and kind of erase other things. So there is this control of perception, not only in how the information is presented, but how you should feel about that information. Um, and you know, if you repeat something enough times, it kind of becomes internalized. That's truth. So there is this kind of behavior reinforcement, and that allows the system to become kind of self-perpetuating. So I think these were the two main things that came to mind, because they were both experiences that I was deeply immersed in for some years, and kind of there were a lot of traps that I saw. I think in the design and advertising, I had more freedom to navigate those things, but inside the academia, it felt really like it's impossible to get out. Even in my research, I try to I researched a lot of like alternative methods of research and methodologies, but it's like you still need to stay within the academic production. Otherwise, it's not legitimate, it's not serious. So it felt really there's no way out. Like there's no way to make this based on right relationship or accountability. It just felt very performative.
Yeah, it feels also very much like it's not only about the approach that you want to promote and then you know, that is what faces the power structure, but it's also who you piss off in a way, like who is the one who would look bad if the system promoted what you're saying or what you were supporting. So in many ways, for example, if you're looking at alternative research methods, then people take it personally because like, well, you know, we are legitimate within the power structure and we didn't do that kind of alternative method or whatever. So in many ways, especially within, you know, this intellectualized place where it is dependent upon your intellectual work and not something that like you created by hand, you know what I mean? It
Mhm.
feels very much like a threat, basically, if you do something different, because it's not supposed to be a creative space, which is ridiculous to say that because it's a field of research. You're literally creating knowledge. Uh,
Mhm.
but yet there is so little creativity that's allowed in that space simply because of who would feel threatened when you bring up new ideas, etc. And when this is happening in science, then it's no longer science. When this is happening in knowledge-making spaces, then it's no longer knowledge. It's propaganda. It's about what serves that power structure and what doesn't. Who feels bad about it or who feels like, you know, they no longer are centered or are celebrated. And that's kind of like explains a lot of, you know, political circles as well, explains a lot of corporate hierarchy as well, and all of these other very regimented structures that are dependent upon promotions, and there's a very set number of, you know, places in the hierarchy. You cannot add new things. There are no, you know, no spaces to move outside of that structure. And this is also very fixed within this monopoly type system where there are only a few names that you can think of, like when you think of experts in this space or something like that. You know what I mean? Or companies who are doing this or that or whatever. So this globalization is just leading to more and more power concentration as part of our colonial world order. And so especially when it comes to the knowledge space or the creative space, suddenly you're competing with like everybody in the world, right? And so that's even more of a threat. And so anything that sort of threatens your position or presents you as less than or not as good as that other person or whatever, now you're competing with like everybody in the world. And therefore it's a tighter grip on what is allowed and what is not allowed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you were saying about academia, but also corporate structures like these hierarchies and competition, based on ego and narcissism and the entitlements of, you know, it's kind of an endless loop of you enter in, use the example of academia, but these are, I think, is true for other areas as well, where you enter in that, like it has been like that for so long that is just how things are. You should. I always felt so bogus, the thing in academia where you have a professor that is kind of orienting you, and that professor doesn't need to do much, and then he gets all the credits for the publications. And like there are so many things that are, I don't know, even take me back to plantation systems and the management culture of compliance and hierarchy. And I don't know, I think this ego thing and narcissism that is so accepted and normalized is such a big driver of this toxic social predation dynamics that happen in these spaces.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.